the case in Idaho and the investigation there. First off, just tell us a little bit about what happened in Idaho, and we're looking about a month now.
That's right. That's right. What happened in Idaho was, as far as we know today, there were 4 students killed. They were in an apartment that was 3 levels, and there were 2 rooms on each floor. And they were discovered about noon after a night of apparent partying, right? And they actually woke up. The downstairs neighbors who had not been slaughtered woke up and discovered some tragedy.
This case has been getting a lot of national attention, and there's parts of this that are concerning to you about how this investigation has been going.
Well, that's exactly right. I think that small departments, which this is a 35-member department, which, by the way, is the number of investigators and street officers on most departments. Actually, it's probably less than 15 across the country for small departments. But they don't have the training or expertise to manage what turns out to be a major crime scene. Now, when I was a cop in Miami, it wasn't unusual to have 4 people killed at a crime scene related to narcotics. Typically, they were shot, and that makes it a lot easier for the perpetrator because you're not involved with using a tool in order to inflict the damage.
And I believe this is the Moscow Police Department there, and they're actually the lead agency right now, and not the FBI, right?
Right.
So kind of peel it back and sort of what's happening here.
Sure. Well, the FBI doesn't have any jurisdiction. And the FBI, in its tradition, was there to assist local agencies and upgrade their talent so they could manage something like this. And so, but the Bureau now is involved in a whole host of things that go beyond what I used to do, because initially with the Bureau, we were trained as individual agents to handle all aspects of investigation, from fingerprint, photograph, to collecting microscopic evidence, those kind of things we knew. But today, there's much more to it. There are the use of electronic devices to measure. There are 3-dimensional cameras in order to store the information. So some of this is new, but I see in this particular agency a failure to understand the basics of crime scene investigation.
Okay, so I'm sure there's a number of things here. Let's start with, what are you seeing the largest issue right now?
Right. Well, the largest issue was they failed to expand the crime scene sufficiently. And so when they arrived, and this is partly not their fault, although fault is not really an issue here when I think about it. They arrived, they were told that there is a person who is unresponsive. Well, how often do you think that a college police department gets a call that someone is not responsive? Well, probably pretty frequently, right? Because people are doing things that they wouldn't necessarily do if their mom was around, right? They're doing drugs, they're doing things, they're drinking excessively. So at least initially, you just think it's someone who's intoxicated and won't wake up. So you send one police unit. The police unit arrives, drives straight up the driveway, not recognizing that it's a crime scene that he's entering, and gets out of the car, walks in. Now, who else is in the house when that happens?
Who?
Think about it. All right, you're a young woman. You might call your mom, but you're certainly going to call your best friend or other people that you know who are in the area, right?
Right.
You know? So the police officer goes in, and this hasn't been widely reported, but I'm sure that this happened, and if you give it just a little bit of thought, you'll know it's accurate. There are 10 people in the apartment, right?
10?
Oh, sure, because they called people. People showed up. When the police come in to go look at the person that's unresponsive, do you think that officer said, now, I want all of you all to go downstairs, don't talk among yourselves, okay? Go downstairs and just wait for me. Don't come up here. You think that happened?
No.
No, because they're just following up, right? So there's a doorway, and there's somebody who apparently is unresponsive, and we don't know whether that's on the 3rd floor or the 2nd floor. So on the 1st floor, there was a gal and a guy. 2nd floor, 2 gals, right? So they're looking right behind and over the shoulder of the police officer who's going in to shake and wake. So you grab them and you shake them, right? you do their sternum, you rub it to try to wake them up, right? But of course, almost instantly you determine that there's somebody else in the bed. You see the blood, you're on top of it. Now you can actually smell the iron in the blood. And so all of a sudden, he's by himself, right? It's probably not a two-man unit. So he gets on his radio, which you would have to, in the olden years, you'd go to your car.
But now, of course.
But now you just call and you say, this is a problem, send some people. Well, it's I believe it's a Saturday afternoon. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
It's a Saturday afternoon. Or now it's Saturday afternoon.
Right, but
there's
overnight.
there's nobody on duty, right? They're at lunch.
I mean, someone has to be on duty.
Well, yeah, but you might run one or two units. My point is, there's not a group of people, a squad, a brigade of people who can suddenly show up. Because what needed to happen was you run all those people out of the house, right? You put them in individual squad cars so they're separated and can't talk to one another. Because the contamination of evidence also extends to interviews. So they're all passing information back and forth and talking, so they're contaminating their own individual stories. And they don't have the capacity to separate these potential witnesses.
So they didn't really know what they were in for when
That's
they
right.
got the call. And that's the first problem.
That is the first problem, being able to effectively assess it. But once you understand the nature of the problem, then you go, oh Lord, you call for backup. You need to expand the crime scene. Now, from what I have seen, the crime scene was very small. It was just around the house. You take a piece of tape that says, caution, don't enter police, or whatever it says, and you string it around the house. But that's not the way you, in a murder situation, how you protect a crime scene.
How do you?
Well, what you do is you expand it as far as physically possible. And that means a mile, if you can.
A mile?
Now, sure.
That's
sure.
A lot of space.
That is a lot of space. But ordinarily for a department like Miami, that's fairly easy to do. Now, you can't block it all off, but you can put patrol units at every corner to watch for vehicles, people, those kinds of things.
Checking video.
That's right.
Going through the woods.
That's exactly right. So now what you do is you use all those units to draw it in closer from that mile out or the distance out and get a manageable crime scene, which is certainly not maybe a football field in length, but certainly 200 feet out from the house. Well, when you think about it, that makes perfect sense, right?
Right.
If you live in an area, where are you going to leave material and items? Well, within 100 feet of the house, 200 feet of the house, whatever it is. And that becomes of critical importance later, because now there's contamination to all of the crime scene that's external to that piece of yellow tape. And so when they begin the process of investigation, they go up, they find, and we don't know today the order of the discovery of the bodies. We don't know that. But we know 2 bodies were on the second floor. We know that 2 bodies were on the top floor. We don't know right then how they got into the house. We don't know those things. But evidently, based on what we do know, there weren't any doors that were kicked out of the frame. And that becomes important because there were coded locks on each of the doors. And there's some information that one of the fathers was there about a week before because there was a problem with the locks. And that tells us a couple of things. It tells us that why suddenly are they concerned about locks? What has happened in their environment that's made them concerned? Is it a concern for somebody who's actually in the apartments with them? That's possible, right? Externally, you wouldn't worry about somebody coming in through a locked door, which is on the bottom of the building, and coming up in because there's that initial level of protection. But then to have them work on your personal door says something about the people who are inside the house to me, right?
Were there any witnesses?
None.
How's that possible?
Well, it's possible because they haven't identified witnesses to us, the public. And when you are in a building like that, and remember, it's not one on top of the other, so it's staggered. So the noise is not necessarily going to penetrate down to this first floor where the only two potential witnesses would have been who were not killed.
So we're looking at 4 different units with three different units.
Bottom floor, but it's not bottom floor, second floor, third floor. It's bottom floor, second floor, third floor.
Each with their own locks.
In each room, there are 2 rooms on each floor, and each of those had separate locks.
And there's no sign of forced entry.
None.
And no one saw a thing or heard a thing.
No.
What's your first guess when you hear it? That kind of circumstantial
Well, my
evidence.
first guess would be that it was an intentional killing. That the people who were killed knew something that somebody didn't want the general public to know. That would be my first thought.
Do you think it's someone that they knew?
Well, that's my initial thought. Think of a mob hit.
No, someone that they knew. In other words, because the person didn't have to break in, it's someone that they already were familiar with or knew, and that was someone that was close to them to begin with. Right?
Okay, right. But the quickest way through all of this is a thing called Occam's razor, which means that the simplest line is probably the most reasonable, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not somebody who has the codes. It's that maybe the front door was open, maybe the back sliding glass doors, which are notorious for not being able to secure properly.
Unless you use a broomstick.
That's right. You put a broomstick in there. It's Friday night, Saturday morning. The girls have been partying. They're back at the house. At least in the videos that we've seen of the 2 gals, they don't seem impaired particularly, right? I mean, they're not falling down intoxicated. So did they go back to the rooms and simply go to bed without locking the doors? Is the front door open? I mean, we don't know those things, but that, in my mind, is more likely than the door's locked and somebody has the code and they enter the code and they go in. Because when you're outside a house trying to burglarize it, the longer you're outside, the more easily it is for external people, witnesses, to find you.
So it's possible, in your mind, that this is someone that knew the doors don't normally get locked.
Well, and it's a college town.
Or they know that these locks don't work.
Well,
unless they got fixed, like you said. The father was
either. But when I look at this and analyze it, I'm fairly comfortable that they would have come in through the sliding glass door, which is first floor, second floor. Sliding glass door here, third floor.
It seems like they're going through a lot of time and effort to be able to get these 4 specific people.
Right. And so
to your mind, that's some sort of hit.
Maybe they know something. Well, that was my first thought.
Right.
Okay. And then it progressed beyond that, as you'll see.
It doesn't feel random.
No, it's not. Definitely not random. And I think what we forget is that this is a group of young people who are, in my view, attractive young women. And the back of this house now is glazed. There's glazings everywhere. There are windows. There's a sliding glass door. There are windows in all the bedrooms. Okay. And so it is almost, you've probably never been to Europe where they have display windows, where they have individuals who are not entirely attired in the red light districts.
They have like
It's a display.
Right.
It's a display.
Yes.
Well, in my mind, those windows, which may have been covered at some time with an internal covering, a blind or a curtain, weren't always going to be that way, right? Because you want light coming into your room, and the downstairs didn't appear to have any cover over the sliding glass window at all. But you're not in this era and this generation, they are less concerned about exposing themselves, and we see this normally in the way men and women attire themselves. I mean, we look at FTX and we see how he's dressed compared to other people on a stage, and he's wearing running shoes and shorts and bushy hair and a t-shirt, right?
Let's even remember Steve Jobs. He just wore a black t-shirt and jeans.
So the generations are different.
Well, and always the lesson was, if a guy like that is dressed like that comes into the car dealership, that's the one you want to try to sell cars.
Well, today, but not formally.
No,
right?
That's the rich guy who doesn't care.
That's right.
But I digress.
Yeah, but that's true.
Yeah.
Well, my point is merely that the world has changed. So you have this building that has all these windows on the back side of the third and second floor. Okay? Then you have a stand of trees with some kind of a ridge behind the house because the house is sort of built into that ridge. And then beyond that, guess what you have? A fraternity house.
Okay.
Now, I will simply tell you that when I think this through, I don't go, well, those girls were probably really careful and about showing anything inside their rooms at night when their rooms are illuminated. And I'm sure that the fraternity had a sergeant at arms who patrolled those windows that looked onto the girls' house and made certain that no one was up there looking at them in hopes that they might show more flesh than they intended to.
You don't believe they were preventing that?
No, in my mind,
The opposite.
the opposite. That they were actively knowing this happened and maybe even enjoying that process.
Are you suggesting someone with a fraternity is involved here?
Well, let's talk about that.